Let's start by talking about authorship. Anytime you synthesize outside ideas into your own writing, which is at the heart of the Q1 synthesis essay on the exam, you must be very clear on who is saying what and who that person or entity is. Always make sure that you can clearly identify the author of any idea from a source. A lot of times the ideas that you bring are going to be authored by the writer of that source, but keep in mind as well that writers will often quote other people themselves or paraphrase other people themselves. So you need to be able to distinguish between what the writer of a source is saying and what other people that writer is referencing are saying, and you need to note this in your essay so that your audience fully understands where those ideas are coming from, and most importantly, so they can assess the credibility of those ideas. Next, source introduction. One way to make sure that your audience fully understands the author of all the sourced ideas is by introducing your sources before you reveal those ideas. You want to name the author, list their credentials briefly, and if authored by the writer of the source and you don't have any specific credentials given, like you don't know who they are, just use the text, the source itself, as their credentials. So-and-so who's a writer for Forbes magazine or a researcher with the Pew Institute or so-and-so author of this book. That's what you should use in place of a lack of credentials where you don't know who that person actually is and what they've done. Finally, let's talk about credibility. Remember that credibility is a spectrum. We never want to divide text into a binary, this is credible, this is not credible. There's a spectrum there. Certain authors are going to be more credible on certain subjects than other authors. Pay attention as well when you're trying to determine credibility to whether you're referencing facts versus referencing judgments. Facts are going to be credible by a lot of different authors just by being sourced. If the author provides a source for their facts, that's going to be credible pretty much whoever that author is. Judgments, on the other hand, opinions, arguments that an author's making, those are really only credible when made by experts in that particular area. So be careful there and really think about who the author is, what their credentials are, before just repeating judgments that they've made. Finally, watch out for bias. And to illustrate bias, I'd like to take a look at a source from a recent Q1 that we wrote. This is source A from the Privatizing Space Exploration Q1 prompt from our first mock exam. A lot of you chose this to rewrite for your redesigned argumentative essay. And this particular source is the first source that you saw in the package, the packet of sources rather. And I want to say that 99% of students used this source as one of their required 3. A lot of you, however, weren't very critical when it came to evaluating this source's credibility. Yeah, far too many took everything this source said as gospel truth, that because this source said it, therefore it must be true. We need to take a look at the author, though. The author of our source here is Kevin McCarthy, who's a United States congressman out in California. First of all, a lot of you misunderstood who the author was, even though it says he's a congressman right there in the description. And his district contains, by his own admission, many of these private space exploration companies. So right there, we have a little bit of some bias, potential bias. Because our campaign finance laws here in this country are so loose, and because congressmen have to seek re-election every 2 years, it's pretty likely to assume that he receives some money from those companies to advocate for laws that benefit them, right? So when we have a congressman talking about privatization of an industry, in their own district, we have to be a little skeptical there because he has some private selfish motivation for making these arguments. Remember, bias has nothing to do with ideology, right? Someone's ideological motivations for something doesn't necessarily make them biased. That's just what they believe. But if an individual has private selfish motivation for making an argument, that is grounds for considering them biased. Also, what's really unsettling about a lot of what he says in here is that none of the facts he gives are cited. He just throws those numbers out there, and that should make us very suspicious because even though he is a U.S. congressman, even though he is under oath because he's testifying before Congress, that doesn't mean that he's not skewing some data. All he has to do is protect himself from outright lying, which is really, that's easy to do because he can just claim ignorance later on or claim that's not what I meant later on. So because he doesn't cite any of the facts that he gives, we should all be incredibly skeptical about just throwing them out there and assuming that they're true. So consider this, just because a text appears on the exam does not mean it is unimpugnable. Just because the College Board has put a text on its Q1 question does not mean that you should take everything that text says as uncritically, true and perfect. In fact, they oftentimes are expecting you to look at a text and say, hey, that doesn't line up, and then use that as part of a counter argument or something. So make sure that you're looking at the text critically and that you're not just swallowing everything that they say without considering them. Let's go ahead and move on at this time to our essay drill. This time we're completing a Q1 drill. And since it's similar to the Q3 drill, we'll go a little bit more quickly this time. We won't divide it up quite as much, but we'll still go slower than we will when we've done this a few times and get up to full speed. We're going to start once again by reading the prompt. This time we're also going to read the sources. Those go along with the prompt. And we're going to brainstorm ideas much like we did before. So for this step, you'll need to get out the copy of the prompt that you printed out. Make sure it's the Q1 prompt for the cost of college, and make sure that you have all 6 sources along with it. So let's complete our first 3 steps. Step 1, mark up the prompt, making sure you clearly identify the statement that tells you exactly what it is that you need to write about. Step 2, this time we have sources. It's a Q1, so you need to read the sources and mark any potential ideas that you might want to reference in your discussion. Then finally, step 3, brainstorm until you know what you want to write about. Once again, use any technique you prefer. And this time, since we have sources to read, take 15 minutes. All right, 15 minutes are up, and here is what I have done with my sample here. The specific topic we're asked to write about is whether college is worth the cost. Another very specific issue with two very clear sides. I'm not going to show you all of my work on all of the sources. I just went through and kind of underlined some key ideas that will help draw my attention back to them when it's time to actually source them in my writing. One thing I do want to point out that I like to do is for the source information, up here at the top, I like to identify the author of the source, the publication information, and the date as well. And then if there's any additional information about the author in the italicized part, I underlined that as well. And that just helps me better understand right away some elements of authorship and credentials right away in the text. So turning back to the prompt sheet, I used another listing exercise here. I started off with just two columns, the benefits and the drawbacks of a university education. And right away, I had very few actual drawbacks, but then I had to think to myself, this isn't just, is a college education beneficial or is it not beneficial? The question is the cost worth it? In other words, do the benefits clearly outweigh the drawbacks? And so even though I have an overwhelming number of benefits here and very few drawbacks, I actually ended up going more along the lines of saying that it's not actually worth it, because while learning is invaluable, the debts that modern college students accumulate, that kind of overshadows the intellectual growth and emotional growth that you take away from it. Because if you're constantly miserable about being in debt and afraid of that sort of thing, you're not really enjoying or applying your degree. And so I think that I'm going to go ahead and go with the university education at this time is not worth the cost. Next up, it's time to plan. That means filling out the graphic organizer. So make sure you have this document that you printed out, the essay drill planner with the 5 boxes. And we'll go ahead and move on to step 3, write your thesis statement, making sure that, again, it's a complete sentence. It responds directly to the prompt and contains 2 supporting premises that will focus your supporting arguments. Once again, take 2 minutes to write your thesis. And here's the thesis that I came up with here. Make sure that you always fill out the little blank at the top to note which drill you're doing. In my thesis here, I went a little bit of a different direction. And this just kind of happened organically, but I'm glad it did because I want to show you a different way of kind of writing your thesis and conceptualizing how you progress through an essay. So here's my thesis. Although the education college provides is invaluable, its cost has become so burdensome that a degree is no longer worth the expense, unless that degree is in a high-paying field. All right, so buried within here, I have my primary claim. Its cost is no longer worth the expense. And then I've got several supporting arguments here. First of all, I've got an acknowledgement that college education provides an invaluable return, and then also that its cost has become too burdensome, meaning economically burdensome. And then lastly, this qualifier, unless the degree you get is in a high-paying field. So I'm still has a primary claim. I still have a couple of supporting arguments, but they're not your standard because of this and because of this. Really, I have just one supporting argument that's because of this, so the cost is not worth it because the expense is burdensome. So just the one because supporting argument. And then I've also got this little qualifying argument as well that's also kind of further supporting my primary claim. And then this little piece up here that acknowledging that college education is invaluable, that's something that I'm going to kind of prime as a sort of concession to begin my essay. So that's a different kind of thesis than what I've shown you guys in the past, but it still ticks all of my boxes. Let's go ahead and continue now with steps 4, 5, and 6. Go ahead and outline your argument for your priming argument as well as your two supporting arguments. Now you want to do this exactly the same way as you did with your Q3 drill, except for this. If you plan to reference something from the sources to help support a claim that you're making, go ahead and note it in your outline as well by writing down the author, source letter, and a brief snippet of the text, either direct quote or paraphrase of the ideas. It doesn't really matter. You just want to note what you're going to actually source from the text. So make sure that you note the author, source letter, and just a brief snippet of the ideas from the text. Everything else is the exact same as the Q3 drill. You're just adding in the sources that you're going to use to support your claim. If you plan to use any sources for counter arguments, hold on to those for now. And let's go ahead and do another 15 minutes since you're planning out all 3 of your body paragraphs. Okay, so here are my three paragraphs. I've already kind of told you what they're going to be with that thesis statement, but I'm going to prime my audience by arguing this, that college education is, of course, invaluable. There's all these great things that it can do, but I'm going to focus just on the benefits to oneself, both inherently and also practically as well. Yes, it does, it does help you grow intellectually and emotionally, but it also has practical benefits. It gives you more opportunities in life. And to kind of back up that second part, I'm going to talk about what Michael Roth says in source B about how a liberal arts education particularly helps with your critical thinking skills, which can have practical benefits in whatever career that you pursue. And then I'll cite what source D from the Hamilton Project says, that they've studied. They say that there's about a 15% return on investment for getting a college degree, which is better returns than in the stock market or in real estate or anything like that. So I'm of course going to qualify this because this is inarguable. The value is there. But even though it is invaluable, it's right now not worth the expense because the cost has become so burdensome. You can no longer pay for college as you go, which is what people used to do 30, 40, 20 years ago, even 20, 30, 40 years ago. People used to be able to work a part-time job and put themselves through college. Think about that. We can't do that anymore. It's way more expensive than it is now. Students regularly will graduate from college with loans upwards of $100,000. And so that is just too burdensome. Starting off your adult life burdened with that much debt, it just outweighs those benefits. And so I'm going to cite here the Pew Center data about how 48% of college grads struggle paying bills, 25% struggle buying a home. And when you're in that kind of massive debt, it's just a miserable way to start off your young adult life. And the misery kind of outweighs any of the life enrichment that the college degree grants you. Now that does lead me to my next point though, because it is worth it though if you manage to get a degree in a high-paying field. And so that's kind of really limiting the scope of what college is, and it's not at all what college was supposed to be. And that's because you need a high-paying job now just to pay down your college debt. And so here I'm going to start off with just an extended anecdote about when I graduated with my debt. I had an English degree and tens of thousands of I had credit card debt because I was not prepared to pay for that. And so I quickly found that if I was going to pay down that debt from college, that I was going to have to make more money. And so I actually had to go back to school for my teaching certification. And so at the end of the day, the intellectual growth that I was afforded, it wasn't going to pay the bills. And that's quickly becoming a reality for a lot of college grads over the last couple of decades. So I definitely want to devote a whole paragraph to that, because that is the kind of college education that is still definitely worth it and relates back to that 15% ROI that the Hamilton Project talks about there. So those are my three body paragraphs there. A little bit different of an approach, but they're still building from one to the next. Okay, moving on to step 7. Now look back through the priming and supporting arguments you've made, and this is where we're going to note concessions, qualifications, and counter arguments, and circle them, just like we did in the Q3 drill. This time, though, if you plan to reference something from the sources as part of a counter argument or qualification or anything, make sure you do the same thing you did before. Note the author's name, the source letter, and a brief snippet of what the text says. Again, take about 2 minutes, just like we did on the Q3 drill. And here is what I came up with. I'm going to actually use two different sources to make counter arguments here. I'm going to, in my first supporting argument paragraph, I'm going to dip back into source F, that Pew Center data, and talk about how, according to their polls, 86% of college graduates say that it was a good investment. However, it just says that it surveyed adults 18 years or older. So I wonder how many of those surveyed perhaps got their degrees back when degrees were affordable. And so I'm going to call that into question because they didn't necessarily survey or set aside the subgroup of millennials and Gen Zers who have had to pay much more college tuition. And then in my supporting argument number 2, I want to acknowledge what Carnevale and Rose say in source D, that there are big benefits even for jobs that don't traditionally require degrees, and they're a little bit vague on that, but what they're really implying there is, yeah, you do get a little bit of a pay bump statistically, even if your field doesn't require a degree and you have one. However, that's still just at the higher end of an already limited spectrum. They mention specifically like plumbers and secretaries, and yeah, I'm sure statistically speaking they do get a little bit of a pay bump, but it's still at the higher end of a secretary's salary, which is not high to begin with. And so that's clearly not enough to make the exorbitant cost of college education worth it, unless, again, you're studying something like finance and banking and business or even law and medicine and that sort of thing that directly go into high-paying fields. And let's finish out our planning with step 8. Move down to the bottom box and note what you will close out your essay with. Once again, just like the Q3 drill, just 2 or 3 bullet points. Take 2 minutes. And here's what I came up with. My final commentary was really pretty easy to come up with because I've talked very much about how, of course, college has all these inherent benefits, but it's become cost prohibitive for a lot of people. So what else could I possibly close my essay with than, hey, college needs to be publicly subsidized because it's no longer affordable to most people, not in the way that it's supposed to be anyway. And so I'll close out my commentary talking about how college is now become career prep is the only way that it's worth it, and that's not what it should be, and that we need publicly subsidized college just like we have publicly funded primary and secondary education. And now that we're done with our planning, move on to the intro paragraph for our drill. Find the lined pages that came with the document. And we'll do the last 3 steps here. Our intro paragraph for the Q1 looks exactly like it does for the Q3. Begin with a hook that provokes interest. Continue by establishing what the issue is that the prompt gives us, and then finish it with your thesis statement. For this, take another 8 minutes to write your intro. And here is my intro paragraph that I came up with. Slightly longer than with my Q3, but it's still well under the 150 word cap that I like to say for your intros on your timed essays. So from the time I started college in 2000 to the time I graduated 4 years later, tuition at my directional university had risen 250%. With my college savings wiped out halfway through, I had no choice but to take out tens of thousands of dollars in loans to finish my degree. My story, however, pales in comparison to the thousands of millennial and Gen Z college grads who have come after me, finishing their schooling with 10 times the student debt I had. With higher education today sending so many into financial crisis, some have begun to question whether a college education is still worth the price tag. Sadly, although the education college provides is invaluable, its cost has become so burdensome that a degree is no longer worth the expense, unless that degree is in a high-paying field. So once again, I started off by hooking my audience with this short anecdote. Then I established what the issue was and finished with my thesis. Okay, now that we're done with our essay drill, we've got to follow it up with some reflection. So just like with the Q3 drill, you're going to reflect on your work by completing a couple of quick activities and responding to some questions. Just find some white space to write your responses on. Unlike the Q1 drill prompt, there's not a big blank page on the back, but you should be able to find enough white space throughout the sources to be able to find room to respond in. And here are your reflection questions. Yeah, go ahead and pause the video to respond to these questions, and when you're finished, resume the video and I'll show you what I did. Okay, so the first reflection question asked us to highlight the source letters to make sure that we used at least 3 different sources, and I did. I used drew from source B, D, and F. A different question asks us to highlight the author names, and I've done that here, and that's just to make sure that we've identified who authored those ideas. In my first body paragraph here from source B, I'm drawing from something the author said, Michael Roth. I'm also drawing from source D in that same paragraph from something that the author of the source cited, something the Hamilton Project said. In my first supporting argument paragraph, I cited a couple of different things from source F, both authored by the Pew Center. Then in my second supporting argument, I've got that counter argument from source D, and those are a couple of researchers named Carnevale and Rose. So that's what I did on my planning document. And I just found some blank space to respond to all of the questions. Yeah, I was eventually able to find enough blank space at the bottom of pages to answer all 6 of those questions. So once you've finished responding to all 6 of the reflection questions, you've finished this essay drill.